A man fled through the tall grass, occasionally stumbling as he made his way west through the boundless grasslands of Iago Lauser's ranch. Naya and Say monitored his progress from the shade of a lonely elm close to the top of a nearby ridge. "He's running the wrong way," Say said. "Can people get lost that easily? The sun is out and everything." "It's more like he's temporarily lost," Naya replied. "The Holy Kingdom isn't huge and everyone knows it. If he runs west for a couple of days, he'll leave Mr. Lauser's land. If he keeps going for 2 more days, he'll end up in one of the fishing villages north of Rimune. Also, it's not as if he has time to think about where he is while being pursued by light cavalry. Normally, if one was lost, one could ask for directions from one of the many villages dotting the landscape. The rancher's quarry, however, presumably wouldn't since they were in enemy territory. That aside, being converted into a range for cattle meant that the villages on Mr. Lauser's land were abandoned. Nearly everyone in his territory lived in the town-sized camp around the villa. For obvious reasons, villagers in the Holy Kingdom didn't like standing out, so getting one's bearings using them as landmarks didn't work very well. The nobles' men had basically invaded a place that was grass, rolling hills, and empty villages as far as the eye could see. If it weren't for all of the villages, they wouldn't have been able to distinguish where they were from the Abelian hills. The man stumbled again. This time, there was a pronounced limp in his gait when he recovered. "Are we killing him?" Say asked. "Stop trying to kill everyone," Naya answered. 4 ranchers rode up behind the man with a leisurely air. He flopped to the ground, exhausted, once they surrounded him. "That's number 24. After getting a vague idea of what was going on, Naya split up her men to round up the intruders' scouts, which she assumed had been dispatched in a wide array to brute force their reconnaissance. Carlos led the northern contingent while Naya went south, combing the land and picking up their enemies along the way. They didn't even feel like enemies, just people who were confused after losing their bearings and wandering around for half of the day. "Then where are you going to put them?" Say asked. "If you plan on keeping them alive, you'll have to feed them, too. Maybe we can stick them in a village near the Kingswood and make them work." "I see," Say nodded in understanding. "Slavery is also an option. It's not illegal in the Holy Kingdom, right?" Naya gave the bard a sour look. Slavery wasn't illegal in the Holy Kingdom, but it hardly existed outside of the occasional periods of debt bondage when people met with hardship. The man was added to the line of prisoners bringing up the rear of Naya's formation. 2 sets of 4 men were assigned to watch over them while the rest swept over the grassland in search of additional intruders. Whenever they located one, they corralled him as they would their cattle, which worked surprisingly well. Their new prisoner sat down on the grass with his fellows, who consoled him over being caught. One of the ranchers tossed him a spare water flask. Apparently, they hadn't even prepared that much when they were sent out to scout. "So, what are they after?" "You're kinda like a detour, right?" Say said. "They were coming to do something else when you got in the way." "That was the debtor thing, wasn't it?" "I meant the bigger picture. Stories often characterize aristocrats as being nothing but petty, but they rarely are in reality. They can be kinda dumb, but they usually have a good education, see more of the world, and have the means to do more than the average person. Unless you run up and break their favorite horse's leg or wiggle your butt in front of them, they don't really pay any mind to the little things. What they usually do is connected to a lot more than people give their actions credit for." "But these aren't nobles, right?" Naya said. "They're just scions." I guess you have a point. You're young and you have a decent figure. Maybe they really did just want to watch you crawl around naked." I don't think they're that petty. I just can't think of any motives that would turn the people doing business with Mr. Lauser against him." "Yet, it's clear that they have," Say said. "We can counter their tactics as things stand, but we'll never figure out their strategy until we understand what their motives are." Say was right about that. The nobles were effectively unpredictable until someone figured out what they wanted. Until then, Naya could only hope they kept using tactics her company could counter. "What if Mr. Lauser is hiding something from us?" Say asked. "He's not that kind of person," Naya answered. "He's a good man that wouldn't knowingly do something like that. Besides, we're taking care of cattle. I don't know about other places, but the Holy Kingdom isn't somewhere you'd find sinister plots that revolve around cows." At least she thought that it wasn't. So much had changed since Yaldabaoth's invasion that she couldn't be sure anymore. 5 scouts later, a set of riders approached from the north. 2 were from Carlos' contingent while the other was the rancher she had sent to update Mr. Lauser on their first encounter with the noble's men. "Good work out there," Naya said as they brought their mounts in front of hers. What was Mr. Lauser's response? "He asked us to approach the nobles and tell them that he'd like to negotiate the debts of the people that crossed over." Was the resolution that simple? The man they confronted seemed like he only wanted to start trouble. Or did he act the way he did because Naya had tried speaking to him? Would things have gone more smoothly if Carlos had addressed him instead? His demeaning conduct and the resulting escalation wouldn't have happened if she hadn't stepped up. "They want nothing more than to put me in chains now, so at least I won't have a chance to screw things up even more." "How are things going on Carlos' end?" Naya asked. "Not as fun as we expected it to be. We corralled a dozen men before we stopped coming across them. Carlos ordered a few of us to follow their trails back to wherever they came from." "Did they find anything?" "Yeah. Looks like they've divided themselves between 3 abandoned villages on the fringes of the territory." I sighed. "I'll go and speak with Carlos. With what our prisoners said, I can't be the one talking to those guys." "You were actually considering that?" Say asked. "The alternative is to let things fly out of control," Naya answered. "Someone might even die. Our people are already suffering enough and I won't do anything to make things worse." Violence had to be the last resort. Things were already so tenuous that a new conflict would surely be fatal for the North. She returned with the riders to Carlos' position, though he was so far away that it took until evening to reach him. The veteran rancher rose from his campfire and walked over with a bowl of stew in hand. "If we're gonna keep these men," he gestured to his prisoners, "we'll need more supplies." "We're not," Naya replied. Cries of distress rose from the captives, which grew even more so when Naya turned her gaze upon them. "Mr. Lauser wants to arrange a negotiation with the intruders," she said. "You'll be able to open a dialogue by ransoming these men. I have 3 dozen more on my side to get them to the table with Mr. Lauser." Naya frowned as sighs of relief came in the wake of her words. What did they think she was going to do with them? "Will it work?" Carlos asked. "It will," Naya nodded. "Nobles are creatures of law. They don't just follow the rules are a part of who they are." "You're assuming that they even know the rules," Say said. "They're filling their retinues with any spares that they can find. Who's to say that they don't have clueless spares leading the clueless spares?" Was there such a thing as an uneducated scion? Even the poorest nobles in the Holy Kingdom could afford to educate their families, boy or girl, heir or spare. It was pretty much mandatory since military service was mandatory and a house could lose its heir apparent to a demi-human raid at any time. "We won't know until we speak to them," Naya said. "I won't turn my back on an opportunity for a peaceful resolution without investigating it first." "All right," Carlos nodded. "What do I need to do?" "I'll unscruffify him while you go through the dialogue options," Say told her. "What?" The rancher frowned. "Go sit down on that rock," Say pointed. "She wants to fix up your appearance to improve your chances," Naya told him. "I ain't propositionin' no noble brat," Carlos said. Carlos' horse jerked and whinnied as Say grabbed the rancher by his boot and yanked him off of his saddle. Then, she chased him to the rock with her hairbrush. She really was as strong as she seemed. "Did our scouts note any banners or livery around the villages that the nobles occupied?" Naya asked. "Yeah," Carlos nodded. "Each village is under a different banner. There's that damn green apple from the other day, a ship on red and blue stripes, and another ship on blue and white waves." She wasn't familiar with any of the heraldry described. Did any one of them look more important than the others? The blue and red banner was over the village between the other 2. Aside from that, they're split even. "What?" Say leaned back and rubbed her nose. "You smell like a cow," she said. "You think?" The bard went back to her mount and pulled a white towel out of her saddlebags. Carlos looked like he was getting ready to run. "Hey now, what are you doing with that?" "Cleaning you," Say answered. Before Carlos could escape, a wave of magic washed over him. Naya's eyes widened. "You have a clean item?" she asked. "Yeah," Say answered. "It's a trooper's towel from the Empire. Everyone in the Imperial Army has at least one." Naya's vague sense of admiration for the Empire increased 5-fold. Back during her time as a squire, she had to beg the priests for clean spells when they ran long-range patrols. The men never asked for them, however, so those patrols were an especially miserable experience during the summer. "We'll approach the central village, then," Naya said. "All you have to do is ride up to them with a flag of parley raised." "We should give him a crony," Say said. "I'm getting a crony? If they see that people answer to him," the bard reasoned, "they'll assume he's important enough to talk to." "She's right," Naya said. "But, who's going to be the crony?" "Alonso lost our competition yesterday," one of the ranchers said. "You son of a..." With their additional roll cast, they continued with the briefing. "It's pretty simple," Naya said. "Alonso will ride up and signal that we want to parley. They'll send one of their cronies retainers to listen to what you want and deliver their reply. If they agree, you both ride back to your respective sides and return with your lieges. In Carlos' case, just say that he's your captain." "What if they don't agree?" Alonso asked. "Then you ride back to us and we leave. We'll send a messenger to Mr. Lauser after that." "What do I tell them if they agree?" Carlos' head moved slightly as Say combed his hair. "That Mr. Lauser wants to negotiate the debts of the people they're pursuing. You'll release the dozen hostages that you have here in advance as a sign of good faith, and then you'll pledge to release 3 more hostages at the end of the negotiations regardless of the outcome." Carlos repeated his lines to Naya several times. His voice faltered when Say produced a ribbon from her belt pouch. "What's that for?" he asked. "Tying back your hair," the bard answered. "You'll look good, I swear. But it's yellow. I like yellow." "I don't." After their acting captain was finally groomed, they rode out with their captives in tow. Along the way, Say fished out a mask from her saddlebag and held it out to Naya. "What's this for?" Naya asked. "It's so you don't pick a fight with someone just by looking at them. Oh, and try to keep your mantle closed so they can't make out your figure. They might decide you're you just from that." Naya received the mask and frowned down at it. She had seen something like it before, but she couldn't recall where. On impulse, she checked to see if it was enchanted after she put it on, but it was just a mundane mask. "Ooh, sexy," Say said. "Huh? It looks good. Can a mask make someone look good?" She was just thankful that she had something to cover her eyes with. Having grown accustomed to the mirror shades that the Sorcerer King had lent her, she had forgotten how many misunderstandings and conflicts her eyes caused. They stopped about 300 meters from the perimeter of the blue and red camp. Naya had her men bring their captives into plain view before having them form a neat rank with their horses. It wasn't long until one of the nobles' sentries noticed them and the camp came alive with activity. Naya swallowed as hundreds of liveried men formed parallel to them across the field. The scouts they had sent out may have been woefully unqualified for their task, but there was no telling if there was an elite bodyguard assigned to protect the scion in the camp. "Rider on the left," Carlos said. A man astride an armored charger cantered onto the field, his armor gleaming in the evening light. He reined his mount in a display of equestrian skill before raising the visor of his armet. "So the horse clients dare to show themselves," he said. "Which one of you pretender knights thinks themselves a match for true gentry?" "No one take the bait," Naya said. "We don't have any reason to. You should fight him," Say told her. "Huh?" Naya's head snapped over to regard the bard in disbelief. "If we decline the challenge and come forward to parley," Say told her, "they'll assume that they have the superior negotiating position. If we win, then it will add to ours. Arg, stupid nobles and their stupid customs." It was just an empty gripe, however. The customs existed for a reason. Her father even once told her that the Holy Kingdom would have been more successful at fighting off the demi-human tribes if they had structured their martial development around those customs instead of building a wall that they couldn't even afford to man. A formal challenge decided an issue while minimizing the costs for both sides. "Plus," Say added, "if you beat him without killing him, we can ransom him for some pocket money." "Money's good," Carlos said. Naya turned her frown on the rancher to her left. "Carlos." Her frown deepened when she realized that all of her men seemed to be silently willing her forward. Cheers started to drift over from the other side of the field. "These guys." With a sigh, Naya dismounted and grabbed a quiver of arrows, attaching it to her belt. Their entire stock of ammunition used broadhead points meant to combat the beasts that appeared to prey on their lanka. Broadheads were extraordinarily effective against unarmored humans, so much so that they were considered inhumane, but opponents in plate or even chainmail armor were a huge problem. If she had the equipment that the Sorcerer King had left her, unhorsing a knight with a single attack would have been entirely within the realm of possibility. No one could have predicted that she would need it after the war was over, however. They were supposed to be rebuilding their country, not igniting new conflicts and definitely not fighting amongst themselves. Nia gave her bow an experimental pull before turning to face her men. "Don't try to help me," she told them, "even if it looks like I'm in trouble. That will turn this duel into a brawl. We won't survive that." Nia walked out onto the field. The knight's scoff could be heard over the sound of the wind in the grass. "You send a beardless boy with a hunting bow to face a knight? Have you no shame?" The jeers from the noble's side renewed. Nia ignored them, trying to figure out how to beat her armored adversary. "He's in cavalry armor, so this isn't as bad as I thought. It's still plate armor, though." Unlike the full plate armor that heavy infantry used, cavalry armor had modifications made to improve the rider's effectiveness in mounted combat. The biggest difference is that the legs weren't anywhere near as heavily armored, as that would restrict the rider's ability to control their mount while fighting. His mount was covered in a coat of plate barding, as well, though the horse's ankles were unprotected. No, the nobles would probably cry foul if I did that. Not that hitting galloping legs is possible without a stupid amount of luck. Another difference she could exploit was not so much in the structure of the armor as the difference in height between herself and the knight. It offered an angle on the suit's shoulder joints that she otherwise wouldn't have. But it's still a ridiculously hard target to hit. Father could easily do it, but I'm nowhere near as good. He's about 250 meters away, so it should only take him around 30 seconds to reach me. "So be it," the knight said. "Sir Matthias Torres, Knight of House Cohen." Cohen? Cohen was one of the most prominent royalist houses. If they had a hand in what was going on, Mr. Lauser was in bigger trouble than Nia thought. "Very well, faceless one," Sir Torres lowered his visor. "I hope the taste of that whore was worth your nameless grave." The royalist lines cheered as the knight lowered his lance and spurred his warhorse into a gallop. Nia drew her bow in a single smooth motion, emptying her thoughts as she eyed her target. Imbued with divine power, her first arrow whistled through the air, and was deflected by the knight's lance. What? Her second arrow was similarly deflected away. The knight closed to 150 meters. How can he do that with that stupidly long thing? Her ability to imbue arrows with divine power assisted them in their flight to her target, but it didn't prevent them from being swatted out of the air along the way. Nia retrieved 2 more arrows from her quiver and released them in quick succession. The first was deflected, but the arm handling the knight's reins went limp as the second buried itself in his left armpit. Still, Sir Torres was undeterred. At 100 meters, his mount broke into a full charge and the knight leveled his lance straight at her. Her mind raced to figure something out. She had hoped that disabling his left arm would force him to present more gaps in his defenses, but Sir Torres only couched his weapon and came straight at her. Now, his vambrace, rear brace, and pauldron formed an impenetrable barrier over his weapon arm. "I need him to move his arm." The royalists' cheers intensified as the gap shrunk between her and the knight. Nia dashed to the left. Sir Torres couldn't shift his charge's momentum fast enough, so he leaned heavily to his right to bring his lance to bear upon her. Nia dove away, loosing an arrow before her shoulder struck the ground. She looked around wildly as she rolled back up to her feet, knocking a fresh arrow even while expecting a sidearm to come down on her head. Sir Torres had charged straight past her, however. Well, it was more that he had curved straight past her and he now lay on the ground. His warhorse was on the ground with him, trapping his right leg. She jogged over, motioning for her men to help the fallen knight and his steed. They untangled Sir Torres' left leg from his stirrup before getting his horse off of him. Say ran up with a stick in her hand and yanked Nia's arrows from the knight's armpit and thigh. The familiar glow of healing magic encompassed the man a moment later. A wand charged with healing spells, this girl seems to have everything. It made sense that she had what a successful wandering bard would consider essential for travel, but all the stuff that she possessed never failed to astonish her. Sir Torres pushed himself to his feet, testing his once injured arm and leg. Then, he raised his visor to regard Nia with an unreadable look. I thought you would go for the other arm, woman. Nia froze for an instant before closing her mantle. Say's warning had completely slipped her mind. I thought that you would think that, Nia replied in a small voice. The knight snorted. Nia stared at her feet. What would they do now that they knew? Someone's coming, Carlos said. 3 riders appeared from the royalist lines. The middle rider was undeniably a noble. On his right was a man presenting a flag of parley. The rider on the nobleman's left held a botikin. Nia's men narrowed their eyes at the container. The botikin was seen as a symbol of the privileged, especially by the rank and file of the royal army. It was life-giving care afforded to those of substantial means, a kit full of potions, scrolls and medical supplies meant to maximize the chances of scions surviving their mandatory military service. Mere commoners could never afford or have access to one. Worried parents could only pray to the gods that a priest was on hand if their sons and daughters were grievously injured in combat. Carlos, Nia said, ride up front with Alonso to speak with them. The guy with the botikin will probably come to check on Sir Torres and the hostages if they think something might be wrong with them. No one do anything to stop him. The royalist party reined in their mounts 10 meters from Carlos and Alonso. I am Lord Eduardo Cohen, the nobleman in the middle said, son of Count Antonio Cohen. Captain Carlos. My man here will check on Sir Torres' condition while we speak. Carlos nodded, and the man with the botikin dismounted. He walked over to where the knight was inspecting his charger. What are your demands? Lord Eduardo asked. In the interests of keeping things civil, Carlos said, Mr. Lauser would like to negotiate the matter of the debtors taking refuge on his land. As a gesture of our genuine intent, we'll be releasing these 12 scouts we found snooping around today. His speech is slipping. After the negotiations are concluded, Carlos continued, we'll release 36 more of your men regardless of the outcome. Nia couldn't tell what Lord Eduardo was thinking at all, but he felt far more dangerous than Sir Torres despite only being lightly armed. The man with the botikin returned and remounted, leaning in to whisper something into Lord Eduardo's ear. The nobleman slowly nodded a few times before turning his attention back to Carlos. You didn't mention Sir Torres, he said. He was an unexpected bonus. It'll be the usual for him. Lord Eduardo pulled a small pouch from his belt. After a moment's pause, he produced another pouch and moved 2 silver coins to the first. He handed the first pouch to the man on his right, who walked over to hand it to Carlos. The pouch clinked as the rancher hefted it in the palm of his glove. He turned his head and nodded to Sir Torres, who walked his mount over to Lord Eduardo's side. What were those 2 extra coins for? A rancher asked in a low voice. Compensation for healing Sir Torres, Nia replied. It looks like they're going by temple rates. They're damn strat-laced for a bunch of crooks. Now, Lord Eduardo said, as for... Lord Eduardo's gaze went past Carlos' shoulder and over the heads of the ranchers behind him. Gomez came out of the sunset, his horse whipped into a lather. The villa's under attack, he shouted before he reached them. What? The newcomer stopped his mount on the other side of Nia's line. Smoke's coming out of the north, he said. Went to the ridge to get a better look and the camp around the villa was on fire. Maybe it's just an accident? Say offered. No, Gomez shook his head. The fire's in a dozen different places. That's no accident. You bastard, Carlos spat before wheeling his horse around and galloping up the hill. I assure you, They left Lord Eduardo with his empty words, sprinting their horses up the slope. The aforementioned smoke could be seen as they neared the ridge, but they would need to make the next ridge before gaining a direct vantage on the villa. They switched to the first of their spare horses at the bottom of the valley, dashing up the next hill with a growing sense of urgency. It's too far. The attack could be over by the time we get there. Their ascent revealed the villa on the hill, the camps below it ablaze in dozens of places. The villa itself isn't on fire, Nia said. We might be able to make it on time to help. They switched to the last of their spare mounts halfway to the hill. People rushed about, many with pails of water drawn from the creek on the western side of the camp. The fires at the base of the hill were extinguished, but they still raged on in the tents above. What the hell is going on? Carlos shouted as they approached a watchful sentry at the edge of the camp. We're being attacked. The sentry answered, but we can't find the attacker. Huh? Make some sense. We found the first dead guy an hour ago. There was no trace of his attacker. More and more people keep showing up dead. Assassin. An icy chill went down Na's spine. She had only heard about them in tales, but even those tales were already enough to give her nightmares. Assassins were even worse than rogues. They were cruel, evil people who took lives for money and no one could stop them. And, now, they were here. The royalists had hired assassins. Their activities at the border were just a distraction to let them slip through. "Where's Mr. Lauser?" Naya asked. "He formed a party to sweep the camps," the sentry replied. "If you follow the fires, you should run into him. Help out with the fires." Naya told her men, "I'm going to look for Mr. Lauser." Naya dismounted and wove through the chaotic throng. Mr. Lauser was strong, but she wasn't sure if he could win against an assassin. She had to help. Another fire started near the villa. Naya stopped and changed direction, dashing up the hill. "What's the plan?" Say's voice came from behind her. I don't know." Naya panted. I don't think the nobles have it in them to do this." "Do you think it's the work of an assassin?" "An assassin? You know," she lowered her voice. "Like one from that infamous group, Ijania." "Ah." The terrifying name seemed to give even the Cavalier Bard pause. Naya drew courage from her presence anyway. If someone from Ijania showed up, surely they could do something about them. As they continued running through the camp, they came up on a pair of armed ranchers scrutinizing the tents along their path. "Where's Mr. Lauser?" She stopped to address them. "What do you know about this attacker?" "He went to the villa," one of them replied. "As for who is attacking us, we don't know. But they're brutal. Men and women were found ripped to shreds." Her stomach churned at his answer. "Who have they killed?" "All of the leaders, I guess. People leading camp circles. Organizers. Company officers on their time off. Since they're doing what they're doing, Mr. Lauser figures they'll eventually go for the office. He's setting up an ambush for him in the courtyard. The nobles will find a way to gut him." She shouldn't have dismissed Say's warning so thoughtlessly. They weren't just after Mr. Lauser, they were trying to tear down everything that he and his people had built and bury it in ashes. Shouts rose above the chaos from the direction of the villa. The two ranchers exchanged a look before running up the slope. "Let's go," Naya called out to Say. A blood-curdling scream raised gooseflesh all over Naya's body. She pulled 2 arrows from her quiver and knocked one to her bow as they charged across the perimeter of the villa. They burst into the central courtyard, ready to join the fight, then stopped. Naya's mouth fell open. No! Pieces of dead men were scattered all over the place. Even the ones lying in ambush in the buildings around them hung from the windows, their dismembered bodies dripping blood onto their severed heads lying on the pavement below. Naya pivoted frantically, trying to figure out where the attacker had gone. She scanned the shadows of the buildings, then looked up at the rooftops. Then, her gaze crossed the central fountain. No! The shredded bodies dumped into the pool had filled it with blood. Mr. Lauser's head was impaled upon the fountainhead. "No!" she cried. Naya dropped her bow and ran forward, tears blurring her vision. She climbed atop the pile of bodies and gently retrieved Mr. Lauser's head. The creases created by his kind-hearted smile still remained on his face despite his lifeless expression. Why would anyone do this? How could the nobles order this? She left the fountain and placed Mr. Lauser's head on the ground, removing her mantle to shroud it. It was only then that she realized that others had arrived, drawn by the sounds of battle. Many were armed. Everyone looked horrified. Horrified and lost. Powerless. So these are the wages of sin. The price of weakness. They had paid that price time and time again, but they never learned. Yet, she couldn't speak to them as she usually might. It was all so hollow, so feeble compared to the carnage surrounding her. And, above all else, all she could feel was rage. Rage at the shadow of injustice that had fallen upon her home. With tears rolling down her cheeks, Naya looked down at the hands covered in the blood of her benefactor. Their benefactor. "Justice for Santiago," she said. The growing crowd stared at her in silence. "Justice for Santiago," Naya shouted. "Justice for Santiago." A few men and women took up her call. "Justice for Santiago." Naya punched her blood-soaked fist into the air. "Justice for the North. Justice for Santiago. Justice for the North. Justice for Santiago. Justice for the North. Justice for Santiago. Justice for the North. Their voices swelled into a roar that echoed over the hills. The brutal, unprovoked assault made it clear that cowering in fear only meant being crushed one at a time. In the wake of Yaldabaoth's invasion, a new kind of fiend had appeared to assail them with a new kind of evil. If that evil went unanswered, there would be no future for their people. 30th day, Upper Fire Month, 1 CE. Do you know why you're here? Because Jorge said you wanted to see me, sir. Sir Luis snorted at Liam's reply. Liam kept a straight face, trying to figure out what he had done wrong. Maybe he was screwing up without realizing it, but he couldn't imagine himself making any mistakes during his endlessly dreary duties as he escorted House Rastello's caravans back and forth between Hobans and Cantor. We're moving you to be company, Sir Luis told him. Liam stared at the powerfully built man, who looked comically out of place behind his tiny desk. The desk was in a tent off to the side of the main administrative area of the camp, which had been built on a platform under a public pavilion. From what he could see, the tent and those nearby were where the more sensitive aspects of the labor camp's operations were discussed. May I ask why, sir? Most would jump at the opportunity to join B Company without question, Sir Luis noted, but maybe I should have expected this from you. Duarte says you've been carrying your tasks not without question, but without fail. Why is that? Because that's my job, sir? Just to be certain, you didn't dream of becoming a soldier growing up, did you? He wasn't sure if he had any dreams of the future growing up. Reality occupied his every breathing moment. No, sir. Then my question stands, why? I don't understand the question, sir. The big man's steely gaze held Liam's own for several seconds, then went past his shoulder to the entrance of the tent. Do you know what that big platform out there, with all of its clerks and aides, is for? Running the camp, sir? It's for problems, Sir Luis told him. Not enough, too much, I don't know, I don't like, how do I, and 99 out of 100 of those problems are caused by our own people. Why do you suppose that is? Liam shook his head unknowingly. Sir Luis rose from his seat and turned to face a nearby chest of drawers. He pulled open the top shelf, produced a small lacquer box from within, shut the shelf, and turned back to face Liam. The precise set of motions took less than 3 seconds. This, he said as he placed the box on his desk, is how men such as you and I do things. If something needs to be done, we do it. No detours, no lollygagging, no useless arguments and no hesitation. No waiting around for others to give us a reason to act. Those people lined up out there with their problems are Lanka. Most of the problems they're bringing up wouldn't exist if they bothered to think. They cause problems by wasting time and waste more time waiting for someone to fix the problems that they caused. When they work, it's just enough not to get them in trouble and they despise anyone who makes that modicum of effort look bad. So adding me to Duarte's caravan was a test, sir? The timid Pedro wasn't the only person he had been partnered up with for escort duties over the last 2 weeks. As Sir Luis had pointed out, seemingly everyone in the caravan seemed hell-bent on doing just enough to collect their pay despite the work not being challenging at all in the first place. They didn't screen properly and chatted endlessly. He was pretty sure that a half-hearted attack on the caravan would have sent most of them scurrying off. As a follower of the Six, their conduct repulsed him and he did his best to ignore them in favor of doing his job properly. They made it much easier to do so by the second trip since they stopped talking to him entirely. Liam thought they were just leaving him to do his thing, but, if Sir Luis was right, they were actively excluding him from their group. Life is a test, Liam, Sir Luis told him. Whether people can see what you're doing or not, everything serves as a measure of your quality. You would do well to remember that. Sir Luis opened the case and picked out a brass pin, placing it on the desk in front of Liam. Pack up your tent and report to Sir Jimena before sundown. Your new job starts tonight. Yes, sir. Liam picked up the pin and saluted. Thank you, sir. The knight sent him away with a grunt. Liam left the tent, staring down at the pin in his palm. It wasn't masterfully crafted, but the livery still served its purpose of depicting 2 fish jumping out of the sea. In other words, he had joined the elite retinue of House Rastello, or at least what amounted to it in the Northern Holy Kingdom. That notion neatly summarized how the South perceived its relationship with the North. Normally, the pin was a standard part of a retainer's official uniform. This meant that Liam was the equivalent of a regular retainer in the eyes of House Rostello, and that status was considered elite in the work camp. The usual hierarchy of a noble house had been extended downward to create positions that existed somewhere between the official retinue and the nameless commoners who worked for them. They were basically third, fourth and fifth class retainers, though most wouldn't realize it unless they made their way up the ranks themselves. Resentment due to that realization never manifested. New entries to the upper ranks simply embraced the new wealth and privilege of a system that worked in their favor. You should put that where people can see it. Liam looked up to find Jorge standing in front of him. How come you don't wear yours? Liam asked as he attached the pin to his collar. Ah, so you noticed. Jorge chuckled and scratched the back of his neck. That is what they call talent, I suppose. As for me, you will find that Sir Jorge does not differ much from Jorge overmuch. What's Sir Jimena like? Halfway between Sir Luis and myself? Except that he has 4 wives and I swear they are all sirens that he fished up from a sewer outlet. Speaking of which, has any girl caught your eye yet? If you cannot decide on one, you can easily afford a few now. I don't know how you think I have the time for that, Liam replied. I've been escorting caravans non-stop. Perhaps, but B Company is stationed in the city so you will have plenty of time now. You will get to sleep in your tent every night, too. What could be better than having a nice girl to make things more lively? Oh, by the way, make sure to exchange your tent for a larger one. As men move up in the world, they have more things to keep around. Well, it's more that their women have more things to keep around. My wife has taken over most of my plot and things are starting to pile up outside. My things. You know that I don't have any women. Oh, you will. You are young, but do not be ashamed, it is only natural. Something caught the undercover knight's attention and he meandered away with a friendly wave of his hand. Liam left the administrative center of the camp to pick up his tent. He had barely slept in the thing, so it would merely be a matter of dismantling it and rolling it up. When he arrived at his part of the camp, Francisco's wife, Francesca, he swore it had nothing to do with why he picked her, was hanging laundry out to dry between their tents. The young woman's golden curls bobbed as she greeted him with a friendly smile. Hello, Liam. Hi. Getting some sleep before, what's going on? I got transferred to one of the companies. Liam tugged on a tent peg. They told me to move over to their side of the camp. Oh, congratulations. I hope this means that they'll stop working you so hard. We've barely seen you since you moved in. Liam boggled at the woman's logic as he took apart the rest of his tent. One would normally think that receiving a promotion meant greater responsibilities and more things to stay on top of. Then again, she was a follower of the Four. The more time Liam spent around them, the more he was convinced that laziness and liberty from responsibility was one of their core tenets. Still, Francesa said as she watched him work, it's a shame we didn't have the opportunity to get to know one another better. I'm working in the city, now. Liam tossed everything together and rolled up the canvas, so you'll probably see me around. Anyway, they want me by sundown, so I need to get going. Give my regards to Francisco. He walked away as quickly as he could without looking like he was fleeing from the woman. Once, he had made the mistake of engaging her in conversation and ended up having 2 hours of his sleep stolen away by her gossip. The gossip wasn't even useful. Liam crossed the center of the labor camp, stopping by the quartermaster's office to replace his tent. He still had no intention of getting a wife, but having a tiny tent surrounded by huge ones would look strange. The man at the counter took one glance at his new pin before trading up his tent. First tent's free, he told Liam. Furniture's extra. Can I use our script for that? Yep. Thanks. With the Holy Kingdom's coinage becoming ever more unreliable, most of its people outside of the cities had long switched to a system of barter. In doing so, they discovered that things weren't actually as expensive as they seemed. Why that was never seemed to cross people's minds, but neither were they in any position to change things. They also discovered how annoying and inconvenient barter was. It wasn't long before they got sick of it and came up with a simple solution. Every noble house operating in the Northern Holy Kingdom now issued its own scrip. That scrip was only redeemable in the labor camps of the houses that issued them, creating dozens of alternative economies around the country. The Holy Kingdom had laws against counterfeiting its coinage, but there was nothing about the creation of alternative currencies. With the internationally accepted trade coins of the Merchant Guild already in circulation in the country, trying to enforce such legislation seemed like a lost cause. Trying to control the distribution of scrip was also now impossible for the Holy King, as any such laws proposed would be rejected by the royal court. As far as Liam's situation went, Pedro's assertion that he could financially support a few wives wasn't wrong. So long as he continued working for House Rastello, of course. These nobles are really good at creating traps that normal people can't detect. Never mind detecting the trap, people dove into it gleefully. It was their best chance for survival and offered security besides. Once caught, they were immersed in a system that incentivized performance with rewards that could only be redeemed with the house that one worked for. Considering what Sir Louis told him, however, the incentives weren't working very well when it came to improving the numbers that every house coveted. Much like Riestes, the Empire, and a good part of the Sorceress Kingdom, the people just did what was necessary and took it easy the rest of the time. In the end, most of those who climbed the labor camp's reward ladder tended to be the rare-driven individuals or those that inherited vocational aptitudes from their ancestors. Maybe Sir Louis was right about calling them Melanka. Ambition was considered a privilege of the talented in the Holy Kingdom and mediocrity was the comfortable norm. And that was their version of mediocrity. What Liam considered mediocre, they would consider exceptional. The poster he once saw in Rimian declaring that weakness was a sin was probably the result of some sane person finally getting fed up with the sheer stupidity of the place. Liam arrived at the far side of the administrative center, which was where the most luxurious area of the labor camp was. The tents here were anywhere between 4 to 10 times larger than the ones on the other side depending on whose tent it was and how much they were willing to spend on their dwelling. The sentries and patrols in the area sent sharp looks in Liam's direction until they noticed the pin on his collar. Security on the far side of the camp was much tighter. When he wandered around the area in the past, they would immediately turn him away upon detection. B Company's neighborhood was easy enough to find, as it was the only set of tents filled with men preparing for their night's work. As far as Liam understood it, a company was the face of House Rastello's forces and worked in Hobans during the day. B Company was reportedly just as capable and thus also assigned lodgings in the same area of the camp, but worked the night shift. 4 other companies policed the labor camp itself and rumor had it that House Rastello was trying to expand its forces even further. A sand-haired man fully equipped in chainmail and the livery of House Rastello stepped out in front of Liam as he looked around for some sort of command tent. "You looking for someone?" Sir Louis ordered me to report to Sir Jimena. "The replacement, huh? This way." Liam fell into step behind the man, glancing at the other company members as they made their way deeper into the tents. Every man felt like a capable combatant and they were what probably came to the minds of most when they thought of a house retinue. They were healthy, well-fed, well-equipped, and carried themselves with confidence. Their living conditions similarly reflected their status. The plot allocated for each tent was as large as a communal camp area on the other side of the administrative center. Most of the plots had a main tent, 2 secondary tents, a small pavilion for outdoor work and still had room for laundry and kids to run around in. It also looked like the place somehow had a working sewer system and the lanes that ran between the tents were wide enough to bring a freight wagon through. His guide stopped in front of an empty spot and crossed his arms. "This is your predecessor's plot," he told him. "What happened to him?" Liam didn't think that the Holy Kingdom was dangerous enough for a member of a house retinue to meet their end. "Executed for rape," the man answered. "Damned commoners always let power and authority get to their heads." "You're Sir Jimena?" "It's nice to see that you're not oblivious," Sir Jimena said. "But you look like you're too young to have been in the army. You probably don't know the law." "No? I thought so. What good are you to me?" "If you say that you're good in a fight, I'm going to stuff you head first into that latrine hole." "I can work as a thief-taker." Sir Jimena silently peered at him with his hazel eyes. "Would you happen to know other thief-takers?" he asked. "No," Liam shook his head. "Damn. We need at least 5 more. The army hangs on to any that they find. You have an hour to set up before we start our shift." With that, the knight turned on his heel and strolled off. Jorge seemed to be spot on with his assessment of his personality. Liam dropped his tent on the grass, the field wasn't trampled to oblivion like the rest of the camp, and examined the plots near to his. The arrangement of the neighboring tents was almost manor-like, with auxiliary tents forming a yard with the main tent much as the buildings of a rural manor would. He didn't have all of that, so the best he could do was figure out where his tent would go relative to the hole for the latrine. What did they stick on that anyway? He poked his head up and looked around, but he didn't want to catch anyone doing their business. It was probably just better to ask someone while the company was gathering. A pair of young boys ran through his plot, yelling as they waved their wooden swords in the air. Liam wondered if he would have to deal with kids going through his stuff. Everyone here has someone to watch their things. It was something that he didn't care much about with his barely used tent from before. If he wanted to keep up appearances, however, he would have to make something out of his living space. He knew that the Holy Kingdom's people were highly unlikely to steal something even if it was just lying out in the open, but, with how he had grown up, the lack of security bothered him. Could he just have another guy move in? If he set things up real nice, anyone would want to live in his plot, except that it was explicitly meant for retainers of his status and their families or women. He wasn't sure how claiming a man as his wife would be received by his new company. It would also mean that the guy would have to play along. Liam didn't want any more extra challenges than necessary, which was why he kept shrugging off Sir Hawke's suggestive suggestions in the first place. I'll think about it later. I need to get this tent set up. Liam went to join the rest of the company once he spotted them gathering. The aroma of food reminded him that he hadn't had dinner yet. He leaned slightly toward the man next to him. "Where's the mess here?" Liam asked. "Kitchen's right behind us," the man answered. "Name's Marim, by the way." Liam, he stuck out his hand. "Nice to meet you." Marim took his proffered hand and gave it a firm shake. "Likewise," he said. "I'm not sure how long you'll be with us, however, your kit won't pass muster." Several of the other men cast glances in his direction. They all wore matching uniforms consisting of surcoats over their chainmail armor, heater shields bearing the heraldry of House Rastello, and kettle helms polished to a mirror sheen. Each was armed with a 2-meter-long spear and an arming sword. Liam, on the other hand, wasn't wearing anything that marked him as a man-at-arms, and his only bit of livery was the pin on his collar. "I'll be working out of sight for most of the shift, I think," Liam told him. "The uniform will just get in the way." "Thief-taker?" "Yeah." "Nice." Marim grinned. "Night patrols are hell without one, I tell ya." A sense of alarm rose within Liam at the statement. The overly chatty caravan guards allowed Liam to glean information on a variety of topics, but there was no mention of anything out of sorts going on in Hobans. Something like that would surely spread like wildfire through camp gossip. "I've been escorting caravans to Cantor for weeks," Liam said. "Is something going on in the city?" "Not exactly," Marim said. "Every day gets a little more tense, is all. A company has to deal with most of it during the day. At night, well, having some eyes on our side's much appreciated. Assuming they even work." Sir Jemena walked up to the mustering yard with 2 sergeants on either side of him. "I don't expect trouble lurking in every alley," he told Liam, "but if you miss something you shouldn't have, I'm going to feed you to Sir Louis." The inspection was brief and the briefing was non-existent, leaving Liam on his own to discern the company's behavior and routines. They marched straight through the camp to the highway and stopped at Rimian Gate. Sir Jemena entered the gatehouse while a quarter of the company went to man their section of Hoban's towering curtain walls. "What part of the city are we covering?" Liam asked. "Rimian Gate and the blocks between there and the West Plaza," Marim answered. "How much of the capital have you seen?" "I tried living here for a while before coming out to the camps," Liam said. Marim snorted. "The only people who can live in the city are the ones that can somehow eat their pride," he said. "There's no sense in it, but I'm sure you know that." Over time, Liam came to understand that every human country was divided into 2 distinct societies. The vast majority of a country's population, well over 90% of its subjects, was rural and thus a society built on the customs, practices, and realities that came with rural life. Urbanites made up the remainder, and their society was built on how life worked in the towns and cities. The relatively tiny population of urbanites, however, had a much stronger hand in the direction of a country than their rural counterparts. They lived in the centers of political, economic, and military power and thus had a direct and outsized influence over their country's most prominent affairs. In the Northern Holy Kingdom, the dynamic was broken. Cities rose as the centerpiece of their respective territories, and Jaldabaoth's invasion had broken the supply chains and support mechanisms that kept them running properly. The nobility was naturally on the side of a country's rural society, and thus the nobles that came to help manage the recovery of the north acted to suppress the power of the cities. The work camps set up around each city to organize labor and expedite the country's economic recovery were, in reality, parasites sucking the cities dry. Whether he wanted to or not, the Holy King no longer had the power to dislodge them. The royal army had been sent beyond the Great Wall, and the crown was financially frozen because the cities, its primary source of revenue, were being slowly choked to death. In the eyes of the nobles, Caspond was nothing but a fool. A fool that hadn't even realized that he had given up his power and was now effectively a puppet of the royalist faction. Perhaps the strangest part of it all is that events were not driven by evil motives, as bardic tales would so often assert. The nobles were not acting out of malice, they were acting out of duty. They were ambitious and aggressive, at least by the Holy Kingdom's standards, but neither quality was inherently evil. In their eyes, they represented not just their houses, but also their subjects, and did their utmost to promote the interests of their people. This perspective was shared down to the lowliest commoner. No one believed that they were doing anything bad, and they actively brought justice down upon what they considered unjust. In Hobens, there was none of the infighting, mean-spiritedness, and backbiting so often attributed to evil societies. The battle for control over the capital was not a battle between good and evil, it was one where good fought against good. Caspond's role as the Holy King was to bring all sides into a harmonious relationship, but he instead was the primary driver of the conflict that was tearing Roblé apart. Liam could only shake his head at the unfolding tragedy. He could only hope that the Sorceress Kingdom intervened in some way before it was too late. Sir Jemena reappeared from the gatehouse with another knight, presumably the captain of a company. The knight split off to oversee the changing of the guard, while Sir Jemena came over to address the remainder of B Company. "Seems like another regular day," he told them. "God's willing, it'll be another regular night. Everyone get to your posts." "Liam, a word." Liam went to stand beside Sir Jemena, who waited until the last of his men were through the gate before speaking. "I want you watching the avenue bordering house over in the north." "Are they trying to do something, sir?" "We don't know," Sir Jemena said. "That's why I'm putting you there. Only idiots sit around waiting for trouble to happen to them." "What are the rules, sir?" The knight raised an eyebrow at him. "The rules? We do things by the book. Since you haven't memorized that book, leave it to the others to settle things. If you think you see a problem, let the men on the street know." "What if the problem needs to be addressed immediately, sir?" "We can only act within our jurisdiction," Sir Jemena told him. "Even then, don't make any messes for House Ristello to clean up, if possible." "Understood, sir." Liam joined the flow of traffic heading through the gate. It appeared that he would be the entirety of House Ristello's reconnaissance and counterintelligence efforts in Hobens. While it should have been a lofty position to occupy, they likely considered him nothing more than some sort of urban scout. After familiarizing himself with the street level of House Ristello's jurisdiction, Liam slipped into an alley and climbed to the rooftops overlooking northwestern Hobens. There, the familiar silhouette of a shadow demon was awaiting him. "What's going on?" Liam asked. In response, the shadow demon produced a folded sheet of paper. Liam frowned as he retrieved it and deciphered the encoded contents. Investigation of logistical anomaly concluded. Though he had gotten a good grasp of what was going on in the Holy Kingdom, he hadn't gotten a single whiff of the issue he was sent to investigate. Say had come in along the delivery route for the grain, so the problem must have been close to the point of entry. After her somewhat passive role in the Draconic Kingdom, his sister wanted to accomplish something on her own, so she must have been happy about it. His eyes ran over the remainder of the message, which included a situation report from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. A new set of orders awaited him at the missive's conclusion. Assist in maintaining political deadlock in Hobens. Liam folded the sheet of paper and handed it back to the shadow demon. "Orders received," he said. The shadow demon flickered into darkness, leaving Liam to ponder his new assignment. Had Lord Demiurge predicted that he would be in the position that he was, or was another agent watching him? Given that Ijarnia's infiltration methods tended to create networks and leave behind resources that could be tapped for future assignments, the former was probably the case. By continuing to assist House Rastello, he would help keep their rivals in check. If House Rastello's faction gained too much ground, all he had to do was put Remedios Custodio in their way. Nothing currently justified the intervention of the Holy Order, but, considering the convenient timing of his new orders, Liam suspected that it wouldn't be the case for long.